You know, right. Nick Durst here with Joe Calabrese. Joe, we have a very exciting and talented guest on with us today. For our listeners, maybe you don't know him by name, but you've definitely heard some of the projects he's worked on in the past.
Yes, it's not every day that you have a Grammy Award winning audio engineer and sound mixer on with you. And some of his credits are incredible. He's recently gotten to work with the immensely talented Kacey Musgraves, Alabama Shakes, Hanson, Vanessa Carlton. So we'll get to pick his brain when it comes to music. And we're very, very excited to have him on. Mr. Craig Alvin. Craig, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you coming on. So just wanted to get right into it here and was wondering, when did you decide you wanted to work in music, and how did you take the steps to learn audio engineering and eventually break into the industry?
Well, I had kind of grown up around it. My dad was a musician. He was making records from the time I was born. Essentially, he'd been in a band and around recording studios, and I used to help them set up the sound system when I was a kid for their shows. They played a lot of churches. It was a gospel band, and I remember. Let's see. I went to college for music theory. Helped out with sound there, and then I went to Bible college and realized that I would not make a very good pastor. So I went into studio work instead.
So I have a very close friend of mine who I grew up with. He, much like you, was very fascinated with music at a young age, wanted to be an audio engineer. Ultimately, he decided to go to Full Sail, which I think has become one of the growing presences in colleges in the country when it comes to that stuff. I went to Marist College, which is here in New York State, upstate in Poughkeepsie, which kind of like a nice little underrated quiet music town here. So my roommate grew up actually on the other side of the country in Compton, California, but he also does audio engineering, and he ultimately ended up getting a job with Atlantic Records, which I think is super cool. So for somebody who is a little bit younger, maybe a teenager or somebody who's still trying to kind of find their way a little bit, discern their tastes, do you ultimately think formal education when it comes to breaking into the music industry is a necessity, or do you think there are other avenues for somebody at that stage of their life to go to ultimately get to the point, maybe not necessarily where you've gotten to now, but to ultimately realize that dream?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all depends on who you are and what you want to do. I didn't go to school for audio engineering, but I was a music theory major, and I found that education was really helpful, particularly the ear training side of it. So that was a big help to me, getting into it, because I could, read charts, and I can talk to musicians about what's going on, and I can hear what's going on. So that's helpful. But as far as audio engineering, I don't know. I mean, I have plenty of friends who've gone to places like, Full Sail or Belmont or Blackbird Academy and have had great experiences. I was pretty much self-taught, though, when it came to the audio engineering side. I just set up microphones and played around until things sounded good.
How has the technology changed and made your job either easier or harder since you first broke into the industry?
Well, when I first started, we were recording on, these big tape machines that are about the size of a washing machine that had 2-inch tape. And my very first home studio, I bought a 3M M79 2-inch tape machine from Motown in LA, and I set it up in the bedroom, so that was a little different. After that came the digital tape formats like ADAT, So I had to use those. And then eventually Pro Tools came along, which is a digital audio workstation. And that's kind of the standard. There are a lot of people like to use programs like Logic, and there are others out there too that are good, but I'm pretty much a Pro Tools guy. I still like to mix in the analog world. So even though I do mix in Pro Tools for some projects, I like to put things out onto a console and be able to turn knobs and push faders. And I still have a lot of the old analog gear. I have an old plate reverb, which I love immensely. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those, but back, in the old days, we didn't have digital reverbs. So a lot of places had like a special room for making reverb. So they'd have a big room with like hard walls, and then there would be like a speaker and a microphone in the room, so you could simulate room sounds. Well, they figured out that if you take a steel plate and you stretch it really tight and put a speaker on it, and then you can put like little like contact pickups, like guitar pickups on it, and run that back to the console. When the plate vibrates, it creates a sound like a room. They sound gorgeous, but they're huge and really heavy, and I like to use them. So I've still got a lot of that old stuff hanging around in my studio.
So when was your first big break? How did that opportunity ultimately fall across your lap?
Well, so I was walking out of New Testament history class in college, and a guy came up to me and said, I remember his name was John, and he said, "Hey, do you know that they have a studio here at a college?" And I said, "No, I didn't know that." So he took me to what I thought was like a closet, but when he opened the door, it was a full recording studio that was never like being used. And it was a nice studio. So I went and asked permission to get in there on the weekends, and they let me. And I just recorded this little kind of folk band that, was on campus. And they ended up selling, I think, about 20,000 copies of that record locally, which then got them a record deal. And the producer, Joe Ciccarelli, came out and produced the album. And I got to help him on that album. And I've really kind of never looked back. I've been working ever since.
That's a great story there. Who is the first major act or artist that you ended up working with, and how did you get in touch with them so that you kind of establish yourself in the industry with some bigger names?
Well, I guess I don't know how to gauge that as far as major act. One of the first times I remember working with someone who was, famous was working with Hanson, and I've been their engineer now or one of their engineers for, I don't know, I think well over 15 years now. But that was just simply because I was living in Oklahoma, and at the time there were not a lot of qualified studio engineers in the state of Oklahoma. So their guy who was working for them at the studio had to leave, and I was pretty much like the first person that they found who could come in and help them out. So I went and worked with them on an album called The Walk, helped finish that album up. And then, I've been kind of working with them off and on ever since.
So of course they're a big act, and you worked with some other big names as well. Just want to run through some of these, give us a brief summary of something that comes to mind or memory working with these people. We'll start off with Vanessa Carlton.
Well, I never actually got to meet Vanessa, except for on the phone. So I do a lot of mixing, and the way mixing works these days is that I have my studio, I show up, and then someone, usually the producer, will just email files to me, and then I work on the music and I send them files, and then they, we talk on the phone, we email, we chat back and forth until the project's done. But I'd say for, a majority of the people I work with, I never actually get to be in the same room with them. So, and Vanessa was one of those, even though I found out years later that we were neighbors. Like, she just lived around the corner from where I lived.
So how different is it for you, working on a music with her style versus, Alabama Shakes or Little Big Town? And does it really impact you at all in your job based on what genre the musician is?
Well, generally, I mean, I try to be I try to be a good listener, and then, I take the knowledge that I have of the, of the studio, of the equipment, whatever. And I try to match their sound with the stuff that is going to best capture it. And so when I went in with Little Big Town, I was working with Ian and Daniel, who produced Kacey Musgraves. And, we were just there for, I think, a day or two, and just recorded some songs. And, I think they showed up, for maybe, an hour of those sessions. And the rest of the time was just us, doing what we normally do when we work with, Kacey or Karen Elson, or, we've worked with a number of people. And that's just me kind of helping them find, their vision. With Alabama Shakes, I should, make that, I should correct that. I've worked with Britney Howard quite a bit on her solo stuff. But the stuff that I've been doing with Britney has all been for like we recorded an entire set, show at the Ryman last year during the whole pandemic thing. We went in and recorded that. We've done several things at Sound Emporium and Blackbird Studios, and most of that stuff is stuff that's intended for release online for YouTube, or for charity events, or for late night TV shows, stuff like that.
So while you're working on Golden Hour, did you realize, wow, this is a special album here? And what was your reaction when you got nominated for a Grammy? Were you like, well, no surprise? And what was your reaction when you won the Grammy?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. When I remember the first day we started on that record, we were actually at Sheryl Crow's house. She has a studio up in the loft of her barn, her horse barn. So we were there, and we recorded the first song, which I believe was "Oh What a World." And I drove home and told my wife, I was like, I don't want to jinx it, but this is really good. Maybe album of the year good. I said that, and it was the only time I've ever said that, so I kind of had a feeling from day one that it was special.
Prophetic.
And then it just, we worked on it for several months, and it just kept getting better and better and better. And it was really, that was a pretty wonderful experience, recording that record. As far as the Grammys go, it's always thrilling. I'd been nominated for several Grammys in the past, but I'd never won one. So I was like, well, I've seen this before, for me, it just, it had never panned out. But I remember I was at Vance Powell's house for, I think, a New Year's Eve party. And Vance looked at me, and he's won several Grammys because he's worked with, Chris Stapleton, and, the list goes on and on, the Raconteurs and all that. And he just looked at me and said, "It's your year, man." And I was like, "I don't know." He's like, "No, I can tell you, it's your year. You're going to do it." And I was like, "Okay, cool, whatever." And I didn't believe him, but it was pretty thrilling.
Yeah, obviously a high point in your career, very exciting. And what was the thought process for you here with Starcrossed and your involvement in that? And what do you think of the album's success so far?
I really love this album. It's a completely different completely different like emotion than Golden Hour was. You know, it's a little darker, has a little bit more of a South American or Spanish vibe to it, especially with the classical acoustic guitar and all that. But yeah, I really love the album. I love the songwriting on it, and it was fun to get to, you know, try something new. You know, we were trying to mix elements of like 90s R&B with this, you know, with Kacey's kind of country sound. And then, you know, we weren't trying to make it like Golden Hour, but it was the same group of people, you know, these same exact people working on it. So I think when we get together, we kind of naturally make that sound when we're in the room.
So you mentioned before how most of the time you're not necessarily in the same room as people that you're working with. So in terms of the question that I'm about to ask you, I'm going to try to change it up a little bit. So,
Okay.
so when you're in the process of recording, let's say, and remember, you know, for our listeners who are watching this, essentially you're the one being paid for your input. Whether you want to consider yourself an expert or not, I don't know, maybe it's going too far, but you're essentially paid for your input and your opinion regarding audio and sound here. And what happens when your specific opinion or your vision for how a specific song should be recorded, or maybe the direction of the record itself based on your prior experience, what happens when that is kind of in conflict or differentiates from the artist or artist that you're working with?
Well, first of all, I have to acknowledge that that happens all the time. That's normal. That sounds like a Tuesday to me, you know. What you do, like, I don't consider like my opinions or my ideas to be sacred at all. I'm there to help, and I want to help people, you know, achieve their goals and their vision. And so, you know, we try things all the time that don't work, you know, and I think Kacey's records are a good example of this. We throw out, you know, 95% of the stuff that we record. We try things and go like, well, that's not working, next, you know. And it's become kind of a joke. We call it, you know, she's like, you know, we call her the hatchet on, you know, because she just will go in and just chop everything out of a song, and then we'll go redo everything, and then she'll chop half of that out, and then we'll redo it. And it's not uncommon to try, you know, recording a song several times. I think like on Golden Hour, the song Space Cowboy, I can't remember how many times we recorded that song. There was an entire, like, I think 5 days straight after we were pretty much done with the whole record, but we went in for an entire 5 days and did nothing but rethink different ways of recording that song, because we just hadn't found anything we liked yet. And it really came down to the key change, which we knew we had to have a key change in it, but everything felt a little too Celine Dion or whatever. Anytime we tried to change keys, we finally ended up hiding it inside the steel guitar solo, so so that you didn't really notice there was a modulation. That's how we solved that problem. But you know, it's pretty common to try things that don't work, and what you do when things don't work is you go, oh, that didn't work, what should we try next? You move on.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of give and take, trying different things, and you know that's the nature of the beast. But it all works out in the end.
Yeah.
You were in Nashville. You recently, in the last year, relocated to Alabama, where you're going to build your recording studio there, Noble Steed Recording Studios. So tell us a little bit about that experience so far and what the goals you hope to accomplish are in the new studio.
Yeah, man, I was in Nashville for 13 years, And at the end of 2020, after our, not just the pandemic, but we also got hit by a massive tornado, and our neighborhood was pretty devastated. And my wife and I, after sitting around for most of the year and kind of trying to figure out what we were going to do, we had been coming down to Muscle Shoals, Alabama, to work for about 4 years, just making occasional trips down here. And I think it was in November where we kind of just made a decision, like, well, let's look for a house, and we looked around, and eventually a friend of mine was selling his place, and we really liked it. So we came down and just kind of on a whim, just bought it and moved. And, thinking the whole time, well, this may not work out, and Nashville's only 2 hours away. We can always go back. And, but we've been here now almost a year, and we love it. We bought a building that we're converting into a recording studio. It was an old doctor's office. And that project's going really well. It's a beautiful building in a great part of town. There's several other studios right in the downtown area of Sheffield, Alabama. And just so you know, Muscle Shoals, people think that it's one city, but it's actually kind of, 4 cities. It's we live in Florence, our studio's in Sheffield, but there's also Muscle Shoals and Tuscumbia, which make up an area that everybody just calls the Shoals. So, but when you hear about like Muscle Shoals Sound, like right now I'm sitting in Muscle Shoals Sound Studio A, which is now called Cypress Moon, down on the river. But I'm in Sheffield, Alabama. So, but the 4 towns, you're never like more than 15 minutes away from where you want to be. Because it's all right here. That work, unless you want to be at a freeway. The freeway is over an hour away.
So I wanted to ask you, what was kind of your I'm right moment, either in your life or your career? And what I mean by that is someone was telling you, hey, Craig, you got to do this way, and this is the only way it's going to work out for you. And you said, no, I think I'm going to do it my way, and ultimately you'll see, well, I'm right about that.
Yeah, man, I think that when you're trying to do something that is nowadays, it's not so weird to be a recording engineer, because with the internet, that information is out there. The recording technology these days is really good and fairly inexpensive. So lots of people call themselves recording engineers. But back when I started doing it in the 90s, we didn't really have the internet. And what was there of the internet was not that great. There was not good information on the internet for how to do this. And, there were a lot of times, especially after my kids were born, people would come to me and tell me that I was being foolish, that I should, go get a real job, because, obviously music is not a real job in a lot of people's minds. And, I can remember, my brother trying to convince me to grow up and be responsible, and various other people, especially people at church, thought I was just absolutely crazy. But I don't know. I've always kind of just done my own thing anyway. So I kind of put myself in a position where I had to succeed, because I really didn't give myself any other options.
That's always the best way to get ahead.
Yep.
So I wanted to ask you, favorite artists growing up, top influences, and who are your favorites now?
Well, let's see. Growing up, back in the 80s, I was always a big U2 fan. I was a big gosh, I remember loving Men at Work, especially when I was in junior high. I love that. I love Prince. Um, but then kind of I lived in the Northwest during the whole grunge era. So I loved all that stuff. Particularly though, I really liked Nirvana and I liked Alice in Chains. And then I, started following all these other bands that, especially around the Seattle scene. You had like Pedro the Lion, and there was in Portland, we had Slater Kinney. Elliott Smith, of course, was from Portland, and he had a studio there. So I was acquainted with him. Pavement. And then, like these days, the funny thing is that I just kind of had this weird moment where I started listening to yacht rock, like AM Gold, like all of the, Ambrosia, Firefall, Dr. Hook, Steely Dan, England Dan, all that stuff. And so now that's kind of like when like if I'm just hanging out with my wife and we're, like having some drinks and, have friends over, that's what we're listening to. So, which is what was like on the radio when I was a kid. So.
It's all great. A lot of my friends, we love that whole like alternative grunge thing. And they're all huge Pearl Jam fans. So when they listen back to this and they listen to, and they say, and they hear you say Nirvana and Alice in Chains, they might get a little irked because they're all huge Pearl Jam fans. I have one of my best friends. He moved out to California, but he recently came back here to the East Coast because they went to see her now, and then he went back to California because then he went to see Ohana, the festival. Mm-hmm. So, but they're all huge Pearl Jam fans, huge music fans. Last question before we let you go: is there any one particular artist or group that right now catches your ear, that you love what they're doing and you haven't had the opportunity to work with, but if you could work with one now, who would you work with?
Gosh. Man, I really don't know. I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about that stuff. Is that a weird answer?
Let's say you had a couple of options in front of you, some people that you like, and you had the opportunity, like this was it, like you really, really wanted to work with one artist or group.
Well, I mean, I'd be thrilled to get to work with Paul McCartney. I would love that, just because I was a big Beatles fan like everyone else, I've always wanted to work with U2, just because that was one of the first, kind of alternative bands that I fell in love with. Even though I haven't really like loved their recent albums, maybe I could fix that. I don't know.
I don't know if you would want to tell them that, but all great answers. Craig, thank you so much for doing this with us. We really appreciate it. Had a lot of fun. Nick and I, our wheelhouse is mostly doing stuff with sports, but every now and then we get to have other entertainers. Recently, we've had a bunch of musical guests on, so now we can add you to the list and diversify what we do here a little bit. So we had a lot of fun. What we do here is we always give our guests the last words. So I'm sure there's other things you would like to share, other things you would like to promote. So whatever comes to mind, feel free, talk, go right ahead. Once again, this was really, really fun. I really appreciate it. And thanks for coming on with us.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I would just really like to encourage people, if they are thinking about, getting into doing music and, having any kind of career in music, don't get distracted by, the stuff like recording studios or, or guitars or, whatever it is that catches your interest. Don't get too distracted by it, because it really does come down to, like, you have to have a great song first. always start with the song. And you don't have to have a lot of money or the best instrument or even the most talent to write a good song. And I would really love to encourage people to get out there with good songs. Because if you don't write a good song, I can't go to work tomorrow.
Great words of advice there. Sure. Well, Craig, we appreciate it. We thank you so much for your time. And that's going to do it here for this episode of Read On Right for our very special guest, Grammy Award winner, Craig Alvin. And for my co-host, Joe Calabrese, I'm Nick Durst. And this has been You Know I'm Right.